We're pleased to have Commissioner Wayne Christian of the Texas Railroad Commission with us. He was elected as the 50th commissioner in November 2016. Now, I understand that that Railroad Commission first was concerned about railroads, but in 1890 they figured out that we had to have somebody around that paid attention to oil and gas. So that has been in place since 1890. It's a misnomer because railroads are no longer regulated. As I understand that the last regulation was in 2005. So basically it's all about oil and gas and environmental stuff. So the good news is they figured out we were a railroad state, but now we're an oil and gas state. Since taking office, he's been appointed by Governor Abbott to the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission. That's huge. That's a collection of about, I think, 10 to 12 states or maybe even more. And he's our official representative among that gaggle of guys and gals trying to figure out how to keep the country running on oil and gas. In 1996, he was elected to the Texas House of Representatives as the first Republican elected from deep East Texas. So there was a time that Democrats reigned, no longer. Thank you, since Reconstruction after the Civil War. He successfully assisted in the fight to elect a Republican majority in the Texas legislature. Thank you. He served as vice chair of regulated industries and as a multi-term member of the Energy Resource Committee that had direct oversight of the Railroad Commission. Then he turned around, he joined the commission because he knew what kind of issues they had. He's a graduate of Stephen F. Austin State University with a bachelor's degree in general business in 1973. And the good news is he came to that situation, but even better, he was quite a musician. In 1979, he ended up with a Grammy Award finalist position. He had a band called, I think, the Mercy River Brothers or band, whatever it was. And he'll talk about that. But his strong belief is all regulations should be based on sound science and not speculation. Commissioner Christian, great to have you here. Thanks for sharing your time.
Good morning.
Now, let me just tell people, as questions come to mind during his presentation, you have two ways to tell us. Write an email to Jim Peacock or use the chat box. We'll assemble those questions, and at 10:45 we'll begin the Q&A. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here, be with you. And let me just say that my design my box a little bit so I can center. There you go. To ask questions of you. I'm the guy that I'm the politician. I'm statewide elected for this office for 14 years, as mentioned. I served in the Texas legislature, and I came to the Railroad Commission from some experience, had regulated the Railroad Commission, but my main past in oil and gas, my dad owned the Exxon station in Tenny Hawk, Texas, population 1,097, and we understood how the real world works with oil and gas out there. Quickly, let me tell you, the Railroad Commission, of course, like you mentioned, has nothing to do with railroads. Kind of the simple story is originally you regulated the moving of oil and gas to and from the market by trains. So if we regulated the railroads, we regulated oil and gas production and the delivery. So we're not doing that any longer. Pipelines, of course, and all kinds of methods have been used in days, so we no longer have railroads. So the Railroad Commission, though, by Forbes magazine, is stated as the most respected regulatory agency on planet Earth for oil and gas. We in Texas right now are, before the downturn, we're responsible for 40% of the production of the United States oil and gas in our state. And I'll cover some areas I think that we're going to see increases in that significantly in the future, as long as we stay an oil and gas producing state. The Railroad Commission itself has about 900 plus employees. It's the most impressive organization I've ever worked with, and great people that have expertise in real world technology, and we lead the way. Our task, I believe, is to provide cheap, predictable, and science-based decisions. And our goal is cheap, plentiful, and reliable energy for this country. Basically that. And we want, we're leading the country in that. Now, what I'm going to do this morning is go through some presentations I have with you as experts. And my desire this morning is I'm not educating you. I want you to listen to how I communicate with our public, because I think, as it's been mentioned, that is what we've got to start doing, is fighting for the truth for oil and gas and for fossil fuels, which has been terribly warped by a bunch of Vietnam draft dodging tenured professors that have taught a couple of generations of our kids a lot of false information. And quite frankly, we've been wimps in fighting back. And I think it's time we took a stand, put on our big boy and girl britches, and go fight for the truth for what has made America great. And I'm going to just flip through some articles I have here. I'm going to go through this information, and at the end, or you can contact me later, please correct me so that I'm doing things right. Right now, 100% of the state rainy day fund comes from oil and gas and produced minerals that the Railroad Commission regulates. So why do we need oil and gas? Well, it's 1/3 of our total economy in the state of Texas. It's 1 out of 10 jobs, oil and gas and fossil fuel. And for every dollar that they fund the Railroad Commission from the Texas legislature, the state returns $51.25. Pretty good return on the buck for investment from the state. In fact, during the entire previous Biden administration, those entire 8 years, there was an anemic recovery of less than 1% of gross national product. Fact, had it not been for the state of Texas, which they, in the Biden administration, tried to do everything they could do to stop oil and gas production by Texas, had it not been for that oil and gas entrepreneurship by Mr. Mitchell and others that developed the shale play, which changed the entire industry across the world, had it not been for Texas during the Biden administration, the previous, there would have been a negative gross national product. In other words, we bail their fiscal rear ends out in the state of Texas. Let me real quickly go through some stats from the state that I'm sure you're more than familiar with. I try to share that, right now, do we have a clean environment in Texas? No, nothing's clean, nothing's perfect. And the Railroad Commission of Texas, though, has been working. The most recent issue I was hit with was flaring. That flaring is being used by those that are against oil and gas in America. It's being used as a reason to stop financing from Wall Street and to stop major banks from financing oil and gas, among many other things. But the loss of financing during this downturn is most severe because we are attempting a recovery. And we have companies that 60% of our producing companies are considering bankruptcy filings. With that, they need financing to come back. And we're being cut off to a large extent on Wall Street by a bunch of false science and false narratives that we no longer need oil and gas in our society. So of the two, right now, let's talk about the world-wide attitude toward our shale play. Right now I'm watching, Exxon did an article a while back that we need to move toward zero flaring in the Permian Basin. And indeed, been followed up by many other organizations. Quite frankly, at the Railroad Commission of Texas, we have already moved to try to decrease flaring. I appointed a blue ribbon task force headed by all of our major organizations across the state that represent oil and gas, royalty owners, and other production. And through that committee, we have come up with suggestions and ways to decrease flaring. Now, the reason is, and my profession is I'm a financial planner. I'm a stockbroker, okay? That's how I paid for being my second job of being a representative for 14 years in the Texas House. But the fact is we're losing that finances, and it's being used that flaring is one issue. In fact, flaring at its height in Texas was really, the industry of the gas being produced was less than 2.7%. Right now, because of the downturn and the move toward reduced flaring, it's less than 1%. But that's still a lot of natural gas that's being, number one, wasted, which is one obligation the Railroad Commission has to stop waste on any of our minerals in the state of Texas. But now the investment giants are urging us to end flaring. We have article after article here, but our movement is to reduce flaring. So that'll be done. So even though we're doing something and have reduced flaring, you're still reading in the media by these folks that will never take fact over destroying oil, gas, and coal as being what it is and has been in history. Let me real quickly go through something here that I use, and I need correction on this if I'm doing wrong. These are articles I use to communicate as I go from place to place to young people, to voters, to different political clubs, Lions Clubs, Rotary Clubs, to conventions. There's some points that they need to consider about what they've been handed as the truth about the global warming, global cooling, etc. Real interesting articles that I like here are the covers from Time Magazine. And you're probably very familiar with this, but I'm sitting here holding covers of Time Magazine. So there's a picture of what I'm talking about. So 1973, the cover was The Big Freeze. 1977, The Big Freeze and How to Survive the Coming Ice Age. Then in 2001, whoa, global warming. 2008, How to Win the War on Global Warming. Then you come back to 2006, it said, Be Worried, special report on global warming. Well, global warming didn't directly prove out scientifically or by practical application. So now they've turned to just climate change. Now they've gone to CO2 as being the problem. You know, so I moved in my lifetime that I've seen back over the last since the 70s, we've moved all the way to the fact that we've gone through several different stages. Why? Their facts are not true. Let me tell you how they do it in government. We have what we call funding that we get through studies and computer models. Computer models, as you're well aware, are where the government decides, hey, we don't want to take that issue, we don't want to handle it, but let's humor Senator this person or Representative this person or Congressman this person, and let's do a study, and we'll have a government study. So the government spends doing a study on something that the legislators don't want to do. They fund a study, and the study sends several tens of thousands of dollars to some university where these folk say, what do you want us to prove? Well, prove that the earth rotates backwards twice every century. We can do that for $50,000. So we all of a sudden have all these studies that are done by our universities that are now government studies that were assigned the results before they ever gave the dollars from a governmental agency, both state and federal. And so then we wind up with a packet of these studies that say the Energy Department has proven that this, and this. Well, that's how it was done. You get what you pay for. And computer models, I think, have proven quite detrimental to the facts of life. Computer models are, as you're well aware, you put in there what you, ifs and buts, rather than true science and historic performance. And if you keep feeding in ifs and buts, you're going to get out whatever you want. And it's worth basically what you put in there. So you can change those results. So a lot of these studies, in fact, I think a very interesting article came from Walter Williams that I have here, and let me just run through just real quickly the truths of history. If I can find it in an article, there it is. And I remember when our president said at one event, he said, you know, I don't know if I trust science or that science, well, you can't take science fact, you know, every minute. He got all kinds of pushback just less than a month ago. But let me give you just a few examples. David Vider, a senior researcher at the University of East Angeles Climate Unit, said children are going to know what science is. He said what snow is. He said that in 2000. In 2004, here's our government research scientist. 2004, the U.S. Pentagon warned President George W. Bush that major European cities would be beneath rising seas. Britain will be plunged into Siberian climate by 2020. 2008, Al Gore predicted the polar ice cap was going to be gone in 10 years. A U.S. Department of Energy study led by the U.S. Navy predicted the Arctic Ocean would experience an ice-free summer by 2016. Now, the fact is, all of those were predicted, but the consistent factor in that of all these computer models and scientific studies that were handed to our president and the public is they are 100% wrong. And that's what blows my mind. Are there negatives to oil and gas? Certainly, there's negatives to everything. My gosh, if you look at pharmaceuticals as they're advertised on television, you'll find all kinds of things as that couple walks along the hillside holding hands, smiling, and the music is wonderful, and the voices are doing great. If you read what's going to happen or listen to what's going to potentially happen with that drug, you'd never take it if that was the whole reason. So, because there are negatives in something, you don't completely throw it out. And that's where I think we stand, that the opposition created by our education system, created by the lack of fighting from our oil and gas industry. Article I read a short while ago was of the 10 greatest enemies to the oil and gas and fossil fuel industry. Number one on that list were the oil and gas companies. And I can give you some examples on that very shortly. The father of global warming scientist admits the theory is wrong. It's a great article. It's talking about in 1988, former NASA scientist James Hansen, and he led it. I remember him with Johnny Carson, time saying the world's going to come to an end. He said during his tenure at Global Warming Organization, then Congressman Al Gore produced scientific models based on a number of different theories. According to Hansen, Al Gore took the data provided in a worst case scenario and intentionally twisted it, rebranding it as global warming and making tens of millions of dollars in the process. So you're more familiar with the global warming issue, and I just thought that's kind of some of the facts that I quickly overview on global warming when I go from place to place talking. What about the companies and how we're being pushed into that from the industry itself? Because I mentioned industry was absolutely the top number one enemy to oil and gas production. And what you'll find is that the oil and gas industry has started saying, because I remember back timber. Timber was a great example when I was in the legislature. I'm from deep East Texas. Trees and chickens are our industry. And at the time, they tried to propose a bill that we could not fertilize our East Texas pastures with chicken manure. And frankly, that would kill the beef industry out in deep East Texas. So we hired a professor to come and do research on the thing and showed the differences in that. But the fact is, even though that we were increasing the production of that it was not polluting groundwater, didn't keep the studies from them from fighting us in agriculture. We refused them, okay? The legislature, get this important, refused it. What did that industry do? That movement to stop pollution by stopping tree cutting, etc., which is burning California down right now, forest management, the lack of it. They went to Lowe's and Home Depot on Wall Street and said, we're going to protest unless you stop producing this lumber. Folks, that's the same thing that these organizations from Al Gore, AOC, take it right on the list, to Biden, you take it right on the list. They have done this and display a religion now. So we can't argue facts many times with these folks, as been mentioned earlier on this broadcast. We can't argue facts because it's become a religion. It's been accepted, and anybody like me that says anything positive about oil and gas is called a flat earther, and our politicians no longer want to be called flat earthers, don't be criticized, don't have anything negative. So our politicians, both national and state, have backed off fighting for the truth. And frankly, we've not given them the truth. Industry hadn't. You take BP and Shell have both come out with policies less than a month ago saying we're going to move toward away from oil and gas production. I get this. International companies worldwide, because of this, and we're fighting the Green New Deal, which I'll be mentioning as supposed to be my subject here. But the Green New Deal says basically we're going to be out of any fossil fuel production by 2050, I believe it is, in 2030 on Biden's plan. But the fact is now our energy companies have started bowing down and saying we agree to it. So it's almost like they've surrendered before the fight. Now get this, they have surrendered. Shell, BP, and all these other major internationals have already declared they're going to do what AOC in the Green New Deal has asked to do and stop oil and gas production. That's alarming to me. Who's going to fight it? How are we going to change that? What's it going to do for us? Let me go to the costs that are involved here with oil and gas not being produced. The economics. Right now, and let me find the charts here as I flip around here. Right now, for every, these are, here it is, Wall Street versus oil and gas production cost. Understand solar right now, let's say what of the grid does actually be produced. Solar is 2% of the U.S. grid. Wind is 7.3. That's a total right now of the electric grid in the United States that wind and solar represent 9.3% of that grid, which means it's oil and gas and nuclear coal that's still driving all these Teslas around. They're not running on wind nor solar. The renewables totally, the best figures I can find up, represent 17.3% of the grid, all of what they call renewables. Of course, I sometimes question what the term renewable means. One thing I was called by the folks at Parks and Wildlife and given some information. You know, you hear about these abandoned wells and getting rid of them, and it costs basically the state of Texas has more. The Railroad Commission more than doubled the disposal wells, not the disposal, the abandoned wells in the state of Texas. It cost about $15,000 to $20,000 per well to shut in those abandoned wells. Let's take what wind and solar would do. Let's take wind. Wind right now takes to shut down, and by the way, those windmills aren't renewable machines. Every 10 to 15 years, they wear out. And the replacement of one is $535,000. And from the Parks and Wildlife, not only is it $535,000, and they don't have any place to dispose of those huge blades and those big structures. And Wyoming right now is taking some, but they're going to run out of a place to put the metal and the other things in the future. But not only that, but the subsidies being paid for that are out of the taxpayers' dollars. They could not exist as an industry. T. Boone Pickens, the famous gas man, state of Texas, was asked, why, Mr. Pickens, do you invest in wind and solar? He said, because the government pays me to. And may I suggest to you that it's not the government, it's the taxpayer. Every dollar that comes from the government is not money they produce, it's money they take from us. Let me give you real quickly a couple of charts here that I've used. What about the land requirements? We're talking about those windmills and solar panels. For wind, we look at 1,000 megawatt power, okay? Wind, that takes 115 square miles. Solar is 27 miles, so 115 for wind for 1,000 megawatts. You take 27 square miles for solar, 3 square miles for natural gas. If we convert as AOC, as Joe Biden, as Al Gore, as all these folks want to get out of the oil and gas business, as now Shell and BP have joined them with that goal, if we were to get out of there, we literally would have to cover 3 states' landmass in the United States to get the electric capacity with windmills and solar panels to fund our grid. Frankly, I'm against that, of course, but if they let me pick the 3 states that we'd cover totally with windmills and solar panels, I might give it some consideration, and that's a joke. The hidden renewable cost, a very intelligent person called Bill Peacock did an article that talked about the hidden renewable energy Texas. And right now, the cost to us is $6.4 billion of state dollars that we are paying to keep wind and solar. Now, the point I'm making on all this, number one, they can't produce it. The cost is tremendously high. Look at the funding. The funding for solar in the United States, and this is federal subsidies per unit and taxpayer subsidies per unit of generated electricity 2010 to 2019, is solar got $82.46, wind $18.86, oil and natural gas 39 cents. So the funding is the fact that unless the taxpayer funds this industry, it can't be done. Then, okay, what's the need for it? Are we running out of oil and gas? Well, I remember Jimmy Carter sitting on TV with his sweater saying we're going to run out in 9 years. And we all of a sudden, and when I got into office 4 years ago, 2016, the last report was that we had about 34 years of oil left on the planet. The discovery came in 2017 of the largest discovery, maybe next to Venezuela in world history, and that's in West Texas. At that time, we thought we had about 2 billion barrels, then it went up to 8 billion, then it went up to, now it's about 9 billion they have discovered. But as they go through the shells, the projections on that I've received from at least 3 different companies and their engineering force is over 230 billion potential barrels of oil. And there's an equivalent amount of fantastic oil and natural gas available, and trillions of cubic square feet of natural gas. We have the opportunity in Texas to change the entire standard. We're not running out, so there's not the need to quickly go there. We've got 500 potential years of oil and gas and energy from that cheap, predictable source. Have we cleaned up the environment? Has there been, we've been devastating? Let me give you real quickly that for the past, since 1970, EPA says that, and I've got it right over here, EPA says that the 6 major pollutants regulated by the EPA have gone down 73%. U.S. economic growth is up at the same time, 263 times the economic growth, use of machinery, et cetera, and the population's up 60%. At the same period, the growth of machinery use, the growth of population, we have decreased by 73% the EPA cost. Now, here's the deal. The United States is 15% of the entire world environment. Right now, China is the largest. You got India, larger. What would be the best way to help this pollution worldwide? I think it would be to export the single most successful industry of cleaning the environment in all of world history, and that's the oil and gas industry. We have made the United States of America today is the cleanest industrialized country on planet Earth. Even Barack Obama's former EPA chairman said when she was leaving that she was asked, does the United States need to do this to help the environment of the world, go into the Paris Accord to decrease our oil and gas production? She said no. We just need to do it as a representative to encourage other countries. So we're going to destroy our economy just to make a good example for the world, and to heck with our own people and what the nation does. Now let me get to what I'm supposed to be covering today, which is the new Green Deal. And more importantly, Bernie Sanders' New Deal was $16 trillion. Okay, that's how much it would cost us in the United States, the taxpayer. You have people like Greta Thunberg that came in here and got the Nobel Prize, and her new book, around 2030, we'll be in a position set off by an irreversible chain reaction beyond human control that lead to the end of our civilization as we know it. You have AOC, the young lady, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat in New York. When we had the crash of Saudi Arabia and Russia attacking the United States shale play through OPEC back at the first of the year, then compounded by China, communist China's attack on the United States with this disease, we saw a horrible loss of tens of thousands of jobs and families that are now out of business. You have 60% bankruptcy in the industry. And what did she say, this Democrat from New York? You should absolutely love to see it. And the U.S. oil market reached negative territory for the first time ever, putting hundreds of thousands of American oil companies, workers, out of business, and they were rejoicing. Let's go to Joe Biden's Green New Deal, because I don't think it will be exactly what. Of course, who knows who's controlling when he gets there. And let's say the plan is on costing the taxpayers, his does, just between $5 to $16 trillion. The Democrats would create new fees and taxes on energy sector. We passed along to customers. Look at 5 to 10 telecom taxes and fees you pay every month cell phone bills. All those fees will go directly now to your energy costs, which will increase, and I've seen figures up to $7,500 per family each year just for the energy they get. So while wealthy liberals drive around in $80,000 electric cars, fly around in multi-million-dollar airplanes, and vacation on yachts, middle-class Americans will be forced to suffer under the new Green Deal and spend more for their energy. And this is the statement that I want you to know that both our oil and gas companies, BP, Shell, and these others are moving to adopting before it's ever an election, before we ever decide this. They are to ensure the U.S. achieves a 100% clean energy economy and reaches net zero emissions no later than 2050. That sound familiar? What BP just put out is their goal. Shell Oil Company is their goal. They've already surrendered, just like those companies did on timber, to Lowe's and Home Depot. According to the U.S. Energy Environment Administration, wind and solar combined make up less than 10% of the nation's economy. This is on Joe Biden's plan, and yet existing law and technology innovations have been steadily improving. As I said, the 6 major air pollutants have been going down, but on Monday, Biden said, I'm not banning fracking, no matter how many times Donald Trump lies about it. Back in January, when campaigning in New Hampshire, he told voters, quote, stop fracking and the expansion of pipeline infrastructure. Pipelines that carry our oil and gas, are they a safe way? Let's tell you this. This is a good fact if I can find it here. Texas has the largest pipeline structure on planet Earth, and for every 50 miles of 20-inch pipeline, there are 1,650 fewer trucks on our roads every single day. That's a safer process in pipelining. Go down the new Green New Deal, which is Joe Biden's desire to put into effect. And what's going to happen there, folks, is we're going to move to away from a couple of 3 things. Number one, because of this tremendous gift God has given us in the Permian Basin in West Texas, we have all of a sudden reached energy dominance. But prior to this turndown, for the first time in 70 years, we were exporting. America was number 1 in production of oil and gas in the United States. Had it been, if Texas were a nation, we were number 4 as a nation in what we're producing in Texas. And let me make this clear. This is without totally turning on this new discovery of potentially 200+ billion barrels and millions of trillion cubic feet of natural gas that we currently have at our disposal. I did a draft resolution to IOGCC. The Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, Governor Abbott was honored me by putting me as the Texas representative. I will be first vice chair starting in November, which heads the organization under the governor that's the head. But I'll be leading that starting in November, and I hope to be working toward getting the truth out there nationwide to the 31 states and Canada who produce oil and gas. And by the way, Texas still is 40% of that. I've already had a draft resolution that was passed by IOGCC of the 31 states saying that we oppose the Green New Deal any way possible. That resolution we passed as the 31 states majority, and we sent it on to Washington to our congressmen and representatives. So we're wasting the funding if we put Biden in control. Let me tell you, some that get upset by you talking politics. We were with the Energy Council last fall up in Alaska. The governor of Alaska got up, and at that time, prior to this downturn, he said, those that don't want to talk politics may be in for something, because basically there's no real problem in our technology development. There's no real problem in environmental cleanup. There's no real problem to oil and gas in all the different areas except one. There's only one negative area we have, and that's politics. We have allowed generations of our people, and we have not had the truth given. And so we face politics of that. So keep it in the ground versus use what God has given us. And real quickly, Catherine Hartnett-White, that works with Jason Isaac there at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, wrote a book, and she was talking about this. She said, okay, what do we tell people about oil and gas and what its worth is? You take 1900 or so Texas. When my great-granddaddy was here, my dad was working in the fields. 6 days a week, they had to work daylight to dark, Texas families, just to put food on the table. You couldn't, so there only 15% were able to achieve the American dream, go everything. They all had to put food on the table 6 days a week. There wasn't a family around in Texas usually that didn't have a child under age 5 that passed away. Average lifespan was 45. The 3 environmental causes of death was number 1, starvation when they couldn't produce crops. Number 2, freezing to death during the winter if they couldn't have heat and wood. And number 3 were hurricanes. You remember 1900 or so when Galveston, was it 12,000 people in that hurricane passed away. Those are environmental causes. Let's move to this world now. The world now is average lifespan 75. It's a catastrophe in any community if anybody 28 years of age or younger passes away. The 3 causes for death by environment in 1900, one was freezing to death. Now we gripe because the thermostat may be 1 or 2 degrees off. Number 2 is starvation. We now have 1.5% of our population feeding a third of the world, and we have not starvation, but an obesity problem. And with hurricanes, any life is horrible to lose, but basically, if you have any lives lost it's the reason that we have decreased it from 12,000 to maybe less than 100 in most storms, less than 20 in most hurricanes, is because they can get in the car and drive off. I've used my 30 minutes, and I want to thank you for allowing me. And now I would appreciate again your input of any other information that needs to be taught to the public. Is you've given me this bully pulpit, the Railroad Commission, and I hope to be honorable to use it to get the truth out and make sure that the future knows about oil and gas.
That was a great presentation. Wayne, I have a question. This is Tom Wysmuller.
Yes,
how can you stop the large corporations like ExxonMobil, et cetera, from pandering to the greenies, giving millions and millions of dollars in contributions to green organizations and leaving organizations such as the Heartland Institute off of their donation list, so that the message that ExxonMobil is giving out is actually very distorted from climate reality?
Understand that they're getting the tax dollars I mentioned, so we need to start educating our representatives and our senators to stop funding the industry of the Green New Deal and to get the facts out there to the public and fight it. Understand, we've not come together as either an industry, and say in Texas, and most of the folks do, but we've sat back and we've relied on our politicians. I've been there, and we elect politicians and say, well, they'll take care of us. Well, no, all it takes for evil to prevail is good men to do nothing. And that's why I commend you in what you're doing. And getting a message together and then getting the message out to the public and to our office holders, both in Washington and in Texas. I assure you, in Texas, after being there 14 years, I went in as a railroad commissioner with the fact that you're getting $51 back for every dollar funded that you fund the railroad commission. It's a third of your economy in the state, 1 out of every 10 jobs. And 4 years ago, I promise you the vast majority of our Texas state representatives and senators were not aware of that. And just to get the information out there, that takes an effort. Yes, we have lost this battle thus far, and it's going to take a fight to do it. And supporting Jason Isaac, Texas Public Policy Foundation, is one way of doing it.
This is Ken Hoppola. I've been following the oil and gas industry since 1970s, when I pointed out to the federal government that their models they used to predict that the U.S. would run out of oil and gas wasn't worth the paper that it took to run the electrons it took to run the models. Anyway, I'd like to recommend an excellent pamphlet, booklet on methane and climate by Van Vindegarden and William Happer, two distinguished physicists who specialize in the field what applies to the greenhouse effect, and that is atomic, molecular, and optical physics. This paper clearly shows there's no threat from increased methane in the atmosphere.
Thank you very much. There's some other resources I would suggest that we all look at. Of course, the Texas Public Policy Foundation, Kathleen Hartnett-White's book, Fueling Freedom, is great. But Alex Epstein, if you Google him, has wrote a book, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuel. Yeah. He is a philosopher that has taken on the issue of the good and how we should word our arguments. Understand, the general public, I learned in the speech class at Stephen F. Austin a lot of times that the way that you talk to people in an audience was you talked at least 2 grade levels below their education, because when people are sitting back listening, they don't want to think hard. They don't want to work. They're there with their arms folded, sit back, ready for you to. So you have to talk about 2 grade levels below them. That's why I'm successful as a politician. I am 2 grade levels below most of my constituents, so they hear me. But the fact is, we need to take, how do we word these facts? We can't give them just sheets of this statistical knowledge. They're not going to stop and read it. They've been taught by their professors and duped by the government to believe that something's wrong with oil and gas. And we've got to come up with, there's another book called Inconvenient Facts, and it has a lot of charts and scales that are at least minimalized. So I would suggest we take the information that you and I believe and know, but we've got to put it in a basis that the public will stop and listen and understand how they have been duped. And again, I can't get the oil and gas industry yet to come on board and put on their big boy britches and fight this thing. And there's a great general that said the only wars you're guaranteed to lose are those you refuse to fight. And my friend, we've refused to fight this war, and that's why I'm excited about your organization here and the good work being done. Let's talk about educating our kids real quick. Jason Isaac has a curriculum that is approved for state of Texas for our children, for our entire public school system. But let me tell you, folks, it takes a couple of things. The State Board of Education we elect is in charge of developing the new curricula, and every school district in the state has to individually accept that curricula for energy education. What does that take? Local folks calling their superintendent and the curriculum director in their public schools saying, put on the new energy curriculum for our state and for our kids. Those are a couple of things we need to fight.
Frank Jamerson here. I have a 2-pager entitled, Did You Know These Global Warming Climate Change Truths? I have very short statements that basically tell all the truths about the global warming issue and the fact that climate change is natural. I'd be happy to share that with you. How do I send it to you?
Just email it to my office. I tell you what, my email, and I'll give you my personal email, is wayne.christian, just my name, wayne.christian@gmail.com. Wayne.christian@gmail.com.
Will do. Thank you very much. God bless. Good job. Good job.
Thank you, sir.
Are you doing anything to get guys to capture the gas that they now flare and use it?
Yes, we passed a policy. I was the first commissioner, by the way, in 150 years on the commission to vote against a flaring extension permit. And right now we have companies that are developing, we have technologies we're looking at that will both capture at the wellhead that natural gas. Now, are there going to be wells that are out in the middle of podunk that don't have a pipeline to it that may need to burn and flare? Perhaps. Right now, I can see when you first strike oil, as you're all familiar, there'll be a certain amount of gas you have to burn off. But we are totally having policies we developed, our Blue Ribbon Task Force of all the agencies that have come together, and the industry is working with us for new technologies that will install and require flaring to cease as quickly as humanly possible. And as years to come, frankly, it's a waste of our natural resource. And if we can turn that into electricity or any other, or get it pipelined out quickly as possible, that's the responsible thing. And what we're doing at the Railroad Commission, we're tightening up the requirements, we're tightening up the flaring allowance, and we're going to we're looking at increasing the fees for the longer you keep it going, because what these free market capitalist companies legitimately look at is what's the cost. And if they see it's going to start costing them more to flare than to do something in the alternative, that rewarding them or costing them money is the fastest way to get results in a free market economy.
There's a question about, are the power lines that we have in the grid across Texas close at or close to most of the hundreds of flaring locations? Do you know that? Is the electric grid all over West Texas?
Electric grids all over Texas. Texas is unique. We are the only state in the union that has our own grid. So Texas is unique in that. So there's no threat from the flaring to our electric power lines or anything. The big threats, like in California, it wasn't the electric power lines. It was the lack of forest management that's caused all these fires that have burned down the electric lines in these states. So I don't think you're going to have a lot of trees out in West Texas with a lot of fires they're going to burn, because they don't. And so that would be the danger to the electric power lines in West Texas.
What about the costs? The costs of the so-called clean energy, the cost of producing solar panels, the cost of producing the wind turbines. You can't produce steel using the sunlight, not yet, right? So that's something that the people, I call them the AGWAs, the anthropogenic global warming alarmists, that's one thing that the AGWAs don't talk about. They talk about clean energy, but they don't talk about the costs of producing the so-called clean energy.
Larry, they also don't talk about the cost of decommissioning those units.
Ah, yes, that's right. Yeah, that you pointed out. Yeah.
It's an absolute. When you look at the facts, it's bumfuzzling to the mind that we're seeing happen in our society. What's happening? But folks, I'm 70 years of age, and I'm looking at the politics of this thing. That again, the governor last said the only problem is politics. We're looking at socialism versus capitalism. It's just an unbelievable decision we're about to make in November. And it's one that I never thought I would face. And representing oil and gas is exactly, you look at Germany, you're talking about when you try to turn to oil and gas, turn away from oil and gas to windmills and solar panels. Germany is a great example. Their electric costs have gone up triple, quadruple. And if you remember at the first NATO meeting, Donald Trump had the argument with the German chancellor about the pipeline. They were now trying to do a deal with Vladimir Putin with Russia. You know, why are they wanting the pipeline from Russia? Because they've been proven absolutely wrong that they could turn away from oil and gas to power their electric grid in Germany. It's a proven thing.
Another question in our chat room, if you could gather the flared gas and you could actually flow the gas to a small, turbine generator, have you ever looked at that as Texas decided to figure out a way to use that gas if you had a collection system?
We've introduced the policy to decrease it to minimal and stop it as much as possible. Companies are working with us. The Railroad Commission of Texas, your government is working to do that. We need to get off of talking about, as people who believe in oil and gas, that flaring is our problem with the general public. Flaring is a problem not because it's specifically a problem. It's now less than 1% now, less than 1% of gas produced, and we're moving to shut it down as much as possible. So boom, we're answering that problem. The trouble is the greenies, as I call them, the ones that are against oil and gas, they're wanting the Green New Deal and to shut down oil and gas, are using it with the pictures and the display, and it's the concept that they give, the perception of flaring that they're using to destroy our oil and gas business and keep it in the ground of the largest discovery of oil in the history of the United States in West Texas.
Another question. The Railroad Commission has a certain responsibility, and the PUC has another. So how do we address what's coming in terms of the so-called Green New Deal? Because they all think they got to have more stuff out there. but we can't move it, we can't collect it, we can't use it. So are you working hand in hand with the PUC? Because I think a lot of policies are kind of driven by what they come up with.
The Railroad Commission handles everything. Our responsibility, our abilities extend from when the minerals are in the ground until they reach the refinery. After it leaves the refinery, that's when the PUC takes over. So that's two different parts of the scenario. The consistent, this are all of our state reps, our senators, our governor, our lieutenant governor in Texas, and then up the administrative branch. Again, let me tell you about a politician normally. Now, me and Jason are totally different from this, right? But normally a politician does not take on any controversy he doesn't need to, or she, because that makes people upset, because that loses votes, that loses contributions. And so it's going to take, we as a public, raising the issue of a problem to our legislators, both federally and state. And again, that's a job I think we as industry, as regulators, and as I go around encouraging our different independent companies, our royalty owners, our citizens, they've got to raise the temperature on this issue of the lives of oil and gas.
I'll tell you what, we'll save a few questions like that because I think you're going to pass some of those issues over to Texas Public Policy and Jason. So look, you've done your part. Now he's got to pick it up and figure out how to work that in Austin. So any other questions in the audience?
People talk about clean air. Are they talking about free from CO2 or free from carbon particulates or any other sort of particulates? Can you define it that way?
They're talking about it specific. They're just trying to scare the hell out of the public by telling them their air is getting dirty and oil and gas and make it dirty. Literally, that's the fact. You can't get in details on this. That's why we've got to learn how to message what we have to equate what they've done. It's become a religion to half our society out there and to a lot of our political body. They just think we're dirtying the air. And yes, the argument when it comes before the Railroad Commission is CO2. You hear that about CO2 is going to, well, I can give you a whole list of how more CO2 makes plant life better, more moisture increases life. And what do we do with 1 degree Celsius difference after a jillion years? Well, we invent better air conditioners and we handle it just like we've done forever with technology. So we need to be careful as people believe in this as getting too specific to the argument. That's not what the public's hearing. They just think oil and gas are dirtying things. And again, I'll go back, we have the stats and many others that Jason can give you from the Public Policy Foundation. Since 1970, we've increased every one of those harmful gases EPA by 76% now, while we've increased everything. So the facts are, we are the cleanest environment of any industrialized country on planet Earth. That's the fact that's not getting out there.
Yeah. Wayne,
Willie Soon has a saying about junk science and the effect. The saying is garbage in, gospel out. In computers, it's garbage in, garbage out. Well, Willie Soon's garbage in, gospel out.
Yeah. Wayne, can I make one comment? Can you hear me? The propaganda campaign is calling CO2 quote pollution. I mean, it's pure semantics and verbiage. CO2, while they typify it as pollution, is not pollution. You can't think of a more innocuous, cleaner, more beneficial material. So it's purely propaganda. But they say CO2 pollution, and that's what they're talking about. And it's crazy.
Yeah, global warming, by the way, every historical fact in history, when the environment was warmer, life has flourished better. And that's why they keep saying global warming, temperature going up. Every time, historically, fact, we've done better. Life is longer, more vegetation, more food to eat, less starvation. All this when CO2 increases. And so that they have established CO2 and global warming as being the enemy. When people die, it's when it freezes. We better hope to hell it gets warmer instead of getting colder. That's your enemy, is getting cold and having a freeze.
Wayne, I have a suggestion. Frank Jamerson again.
Yes, sir.
CO2 is a beneficial gas. Dr. Craig Itzo has calculated for the past 40 years, $3 trillion worth more food has been generated by extra CO2 in the air, and projects another $10 trillion extra products and food being generated by extra CO2. So CO2 is a beneficial gas. That's what you need to emphasize to your friends. God bless.
Yeah, thank you very much. And may I suggest to you one thing before I know I'm through with my time, and Jason's a lot smarter than I am. The thing we don't need to come up with is a new message board of things. The facts are on our side. Take the folks like the Texas Public Policy Foundation and Jason Isaac. Take the messages we've all got and we've all agreed with here today. How do we don't need to redo the messaging. We ain't got time to do the definite research and reinvent the wheel. The facts are out there. We've gone over them today. Our challenge, I would suggest, is to get the facts and truth in a manner that the public can hear and digest from a lot of different folks of a different age, color, and generation than the old guy you see sitting right here, out there to the general public and to our politicians. Messaging, we have the facts, we have the stats, all of us are sitting there bouncing those around. That's not what's going to change. The facts are there, we got those. How do we message that, and how then the effort is to get the message out, not reinvent the messaging.
Mr. Christian, thanks for sharing your time this morning. The important thing is you got a bunch of acolytes in this room and elsewhere. So we're going to be part of your ground troops. So whatever you need, we'll lay it out. Let us know how we can help, analyze, comment, or whatever. But you got it exactly right. I think we've just been to a version of Wayne's Woodshed discussion. And I think every CEO of every oil company in this state needs to hear the same story. And I think you've already done that, as best I can tell.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thing I'd like to note here, the big boogeyman in this whole thing is the CO2 endangerment finding that was put up by the EPA. That is the one political target that we all need to be having our congressman or whoever we can influence to get rid of. Because until you get rid of the endangerment finding, they're still going to assume that CO2 is a pollutant.
And Harry McDougall has talked exactly on that issue at a Heartland conference. He lays it out, the endangerment finding. What you say is very important.
But that requires getting the politicians to put their head above the parapet and take incoming fire. And that means they have to make an issue of something they'd rather avoid. And so figuring out how to make them want to take the incoming is something that I haven't a clue. I'd sure love to know how to do that.
I've been pushing the Trump administration on this exact issue, and the blowback I'm getting right now is they wanted to wait till after they get into the second term, if they get there. I think they will, but it's my point of view. The point being that they were going to take that on after the election. They didn't have to worry about getting re-elected, but that was definitely a target. Myron Ebell and others have been promoting that, and it has been something that I think is timing more than anything right now. But it's certainly on their plate.